Hi, my name's Andrew Greenfield, and thanks for coming to my IBM TechU session today. This particular session is going to be a deep dive into VMware and IBM's storage arrays. There's a lot of deep integration, tuning, and gotchas that I want to help you avoid, as well as tune to make sure you get peak performance. Now, I'm a global engineer with IBM, but I couldn't do my job without some great help. And I've got that with Brian Sherman, a distinguished engineer with IBM, also worldwide, along with Barry White, who is a master inventor and also part of worldwide teams. Lately, I've also been working with Ty Tran, who's in the western side of the United States. He's been fantastic to work with. Now, this entire presentation and a lot of other things are available in the TechU portal, as well as my public box link, which you see on screen. And at the end of this presentation, there are a whole bunch of other links so you can do stuff as well as take a look at social media and other various outlets with all those people. And speaking of which, how about a free IBM prize shipped directly to your door? COVID or not? By all means, the first 5 IBM customers who send an email to me, Andrew JG, at us.ibm.com, as you can see on screen, you get your choice of any one of these wonderful prizes here. That's right. You can get a waterproof jacket, a sweatshirt, a polo shirt, some socks, a duffel. Just pick one prize, please. One prize. And of course, I'll be glad to give you all this. So the first 5 folks who send me an email, by all means, get their choice of one of these prizes, and I'll be glad to ship it right to your door, no matter where you are in the world. So by all means, please do reach out. Last but not least, as part of Worldwide myself, I love the face-to-face. And I know COVID's put a damper on that. So whatever you need as a WebEx, meetings, or help, I work every single day without fail, and I welcome your email, phone calls, so I can help us together solve some of our storage and application challenges together. Now let's get into it. IBM and VMware, no news here. We've had a global partnership for a long time. Now the reason I put on the slide here, not so much that, is that if you don't like this video, if you don't like the PowerPoint, if you don't want to read individual HTML pages, I've got a nice walking interactive tour that I put together, and here's the link on the page for not only the Red Book, but also the tour. And this tour I did with Tom Bish and myself to walk through people on all the different elements to really tune VMware with IBM storage arrays. So that includes Spectrum Connect, vCenter, NVMe, as well as virtual volumes. By all means, please check out the product tour. It's available 24 hours, 7 days a week, and probably will answer most of your questions. Now, let's talk a little bit more about our features with VMware. The good news is that IBM has been in lockstep with VMware. And yes, the DS8, we're coming along. We're a little bit behind. And we're in the process of taking care of some other snags with virtual volumes, as you see down below. In other words, virtual volumes and replication right now don't mix so well. And we're in the process of fixing that. But the key thing is we have checkboxes and everything else. And we have those checkboxes because of IBM Spectrum Connect. And I'll go into that in a little bit. Spectrum Connect is a piece of software that IBM developed for all of our storage arrays so that it could talk to all of the different software solutions out there. So it wasn't just meant for VMware, it was also meant for containers at the time, like Kubernetes, and also for Microsoft PowerShell. The thinking behind it was, instead of programming each individual array and worrying about individual firmwares across all of our families, we would do one particular software product that you can install inside a VM, a Hyper-V, or, of course, a hardware box, regular physical, and you would get all the benefits that you see here. So that is why I strongly recommend that if you are doing VMware, you need to install Spectrum Connect because it will educate VMware all about our arrays and provide a lot more definition and clarity so that most of the features work without any snags. Now, the one gotcha I have for you is if you're pursuing Kubernetes or container environments like Red Hat Cloud Object or Red Hat Container Stores, by all means, you do not need Spectrum Connect. You would actually focus on our Container Storage Interface, or CSI driver. Now, what's new in Spectrum Connect? Okay, great. We've been keeping it up. The last time was May of this year, where we actually have RHEL and CENT 8 updated, along with VROPS, as well as LDAP. So no big deal here. And again, last but not least, if you're using Microsoft PowerShell in your environment and you want to control your arrays, by all means, use this. Now, where does Spectrum Connect fit? Now, this is a key slide here that I want to make sure we're all set. If you're using Site Recovery Manager, and we'll go into that in a little bit, there's a separate download for the DS8 or for Virtualize. We call it the Site Recovery Adapter, and that allows you to actually tell VMware all about our arrays so that they can actually be programmed and automated a lot easier. Now that's outside Spectrum Connect. What does Spectrum Connect do? Great. The orchestrators, the operations manager, the orchestrations, the VASA, the Web Center plugin, as well as VAI are all part and parcel of Spectrum Connect, where Spectrum Connect will help VMware understand all of those features, and you'll see it at the center here. Now, it's not in the middle of the data plane. Absolutely not. Where it is, though, is on the control plane, talking TCP, and look at all the features it does on the right-hand side. In case you want to see it in a slightly easier way, there's all the features that Spectrum Connect does, including, again, PowerShell, and I want to make sure you see that. So by all means, please, for your VMware environment, install Spectrum Connect because it helps solve a lot of the gotchas that we're going to go through later on in this presentation. Now, why again? In a different way from a business standpoint? Great. So for the storage administrators, by doing this, you're able to delegate pools and storage to the VMware admin. So he or she can provision their own storage and not bother you, including snapshots and a lot of other cool features depending on what they want to do for their data stores. On the other side, the storage administrator, you're able to define almost a self-service portal for them. So it's awesome. So what does it look like? Okay, screen on the front, and you see the link down below. Happy little purple colors. That's right, IBM. Don't be thinking we're always blue. We have purple all over the place. But back to blue. So once you install Spectrum Connect, you then tell Spectrum Connect about every single IBM array that you have that you want to share out with either PowerShell or VMware or, as you saw earlier, Kubernetes, but I'd rather use the CSI driver for that. So by adding those servers, in this case, the arrays, into Connect, you're then going to, and you see on the right-hand side, we're then going to create a service and spaces, and we'll delegate those to vCenter. So what does that look like? So inside vCenter is where storage spaces and services will show up, and we define those here inside Spectrum Connect. So again, inside Spectrum Connect, you can either just have a default space with a bunch of services, or by all means, if you have a lot of different divisions and business groups, have different spaces so that inside each one of those spaces, they can have their own set of services. And we'll go into that in a little bit. So for example, inside one particular space, I can then give all these different services, like for example, whether or not this is encrypted, whether or not it's flash, whether or not it's highly available, like replicated, and that's what you see on the far right-hand side. So by all means, as a storage administrator, you can set up replication at the storage level and then bubble that over to vCenter administrators, all using Spectrum Connect. This is the reason why. So let's talk a little bit more. And it's not just all or nothing. No, you can go by your individual pool. So for your storage administrators, you'll actually take a look at your various different pools and you'll delegate them to services, which are then part of spaces, which are then delegated to different vCenters. And we'll show that next. Speaking of which, here is Spectrum Connect showing the different vCenters where you can delegate those different services and spaces. Now, what do I need to do? Spectrum Connect is a very light program. All you need is a CENT or RHEL, and you'll be able to easily do it with less than 4 gigs of RAM and a little bit of swap and disk space. It's doing very little. The key thing, though, is that it helps really ensure that all of our advanced functionalities, like vSphere APIs for array integration, for those old schools, like myself, VAI has been around for a long time, well over 6 years now. And all these advanced functions are normally part of any good VMware environment, but with Spectrum Connect, we make sure that they're optimized. Now, speaking of optimization, let's talk about some of the gotchas now. So first one, Cisco. If you're using Cisco hosts, please, I see a lot of PMRs where it ends up going back to the actual host, especially on blades, where the blade interchassis or VIC drivers or daughter card drivers or some of the firmware at the host layer isn't optimized and has some problems. And we've seen bugs with this. So by all means, please make sure on all of your blades, regardless of where it is, you're using the latest and greatest firmware. We haven't seen this as much with regular traditional servers. We've only seen it mostly with blades. Now, the other thing I want to bring up, We talked about hardware replication earlier. How would you like to turbocharge it? Well, as you know, VMware has its own replication. It's called Site Recovery Manager, or SRM. The great thing about SRM is that it allows you to replicate between two different sites, regardless of whatever hardware is underneath. That's fantastic. But where I'm going with this is, as a great DR and migration, we can actually turbocharge this. Now let's talk about that for a second. So we can actually turbocharge VMware's software replication by using our own hyperswap. So if you're within hyperswap distances, which is really, local distances, you can actually speed up any SRM function because SRM is aware of hyperswap or Metro Mirror and then says, oh my gosh, great, I've got all this. And so I've actually got a video about this where you'll see on YouTube, and you'll see those links at the end. So don't put aside the fact that you can use hardware replication from your storage arrays, in this case IBM Flash system, with software replication from vCenter or VMware, and get the best of both worlds and really be able to fail over or fail back really fast. And we talked about it earlier. I just want to make sure you see it. This is where the storage replication adapter, or SRA, comes in, and it's outside of Connect, but it is still part overall that you will download the SRA, so SRM knows about the arrays and how to talk to them and how to automate them. Fail over as well as fail back. Now, let's talk about what happens once we do those plugins. Yeah. So if you want to orchestrate a whole bunch of different items on the array from inside vCenter, no problem. You got to install IBM Connect, the Spectrum Connect, and then you'll get all of our primitives so that you can do this. So you don't have to start fresh by writing scripts. You can actually have some nice primitives inside VMware. This is great because I know the vCenter admins have their own ways of doing things to automate various different hosts and guests. And this is the way you can actually automate, without bothering the storage administrator, all of your storage tasks as well. So not only that, some people like to have all of their storage report the performance inside vCenter as well, or inside VMware's vRealize Operations Manager. So take a look. Once you install Spectrum Connect, you're able to connect using those interface connections and push all of our performance data from the storage arrays into VMware, so that way you have a one-stop shop. You can actually take a look at your VM, your vNetwork, as well as your storage arrays. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So once you set up IBM Connect, you'll have a small little widget inside that program that sets up the VROps server. Now, again, I want to make sure you guys see this. We have seen some issues with older firmware. I just want to bring this up, especially on some Cisco blades. I need to really hype this because we see this, especially at Worldwide, and I want to make sure I get ahead of it. By all means, please. It's inside older firmware on both the blades and sometimes on older MDS switches. So let's talk about NVMe. It's definitely the most exciting thing that's happened to storage in the last few years. Now, if you want to use NVMe, great. By all means, I have a nice set of checklists. I have the links on the page in front of you. And also I put it in my product tour. Great. In a short but sweet, why do you want to use NVMe? Well, you're going to reduce your latency well over 2 times, as well as maybe increase your bandwidth and your performance over 2.5 times. Take a look. The chart on the upper right doesn't lie. We've done that with our friends at Brocade on a nice database workload. Our FCM, or FlashCore module drives, are NVMe ready. And what do you need to do inside VMware? Almost nothing. You just tell VMware, the host, what's going on, and then inside the guests, you tell it, hey, use an NVMe controller. On the storage side, you tell our storage, use the NVMe inside your native storage. And depending on your switch and your fabric, you almost have to do nothing. That's right, nothing on the fabric for most cases. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Let's talk about that driver part 2. I still see this one. So for your other hosts, if you're not using NVMe, by all means, don't use the older LSI driver. Use the VMware Paravirtual one. I just got a PMR where the client actually saw more than 38% performance improvement just because they inadvertently had set their SCSI devices inside VMware to LSI. This is a huge, huge tweak for doing just a different click. So let's talk now about how you're going to use those data stores. By all means, I know that there's benefits if you're a vCenter shop and centric of doing thin at the VMware level. The problem is that downstream, it doesn't help out the storage arrays. So by all means, please, we recommend strongly doing thick provision eager 0 and letting us do thin on the storage side. So by all means, you'll still get space efficiency on the storage, and you'll be able to actually even do dedupe as well as thin provisioning if you want on the storage. But at the VMware level, please do thick eager 0. If you do lazy 0, we don't get as good dedupe or compression ratios. It's just that simple. So please use either thick, ideally eager 0. Next, this came up just actually yesterday. Some people were talking about, hey, what should I be using about the path? By all means, it's round robin. If you don't use round robin, there's a good chance you're going to be losing performance. And there's a big part of max IOPS per path that I'm going to describe in a second. The key thing is please, the round robin versus fixed path is a huge performance improvement because we're going to use all those paths. Now, the key thing we talked about earlier was about VAI. And I want to make sure that it's done properly. So I've given you the actual links as well as the ESX CLI to make sure the proper values are put into the VMware side so that it understands all about our arrays. Here's those values. By all means, please make sure to double check after you install IBM Spectrum Connect. Now, here's that item that I talked about with round robin. We have seen this across the entire industry. VMware on regular SAS disks, or spinning Rust, as Mr. Walls, Andy Walls, our CTO of Flash likes to call them, is different. But if you're going to a flash array, our friends at EMC and Pure and all the other folks out there have all agreed that you should set this to 1, if not maybe 10 at most, versus the default of 1,000. Now, I've shown you how to do it in a bunch of different ways here. This is a huge performance improvement because it forces VMware for every single I/O to put it on the wire and immediately go, especially with NVMe, go to the storage. This gives you tremendous improvements. I have seen no fewer than 30 to 39% improvement on latency and bandwidth just by setting this one command. It's huge. There's the link on screen as well if you want to see the knowledge base on the VMware side. And of course, it's documented on IBM, and you'll see those links later on as well. The queue depth. The other thing the old dinosaurs like myself bring up is, hey, what should be the queue depth for those HBAs? Well, the interesting thing is that the default is 256, but because of Spectrum Virtualize, we've tested it, we want you to move that down to 32. So by all means, I have the links here. I want you definitely to move it from 256 down to 32. And then we can talk about if you want to move it afterwards. But we'll be using your performance monitoring after you move it down to 32. So by all means, please feel free to use that as a starting measure. But 32 definitely is a performance improvement rather than the default of 256. How can you figure this out? Sure, I have the knowledge base for you. Here's the actual formula, by all means, so you can actually figure it out for your own system if you want. But please, to make things easier, start with 32. And then we can talk about if you're still having a performance problem. Now, speaking of problems, let's get through another gotcha. So the ATS is what's called VMware's Atomic Test and Set, and it's part of how it does VAI. We have seen some problems with older VMs, and this includes also VMs that have been upgraded, including to version 7. So by all means, I want to make sure that you've updated the ATS heartbeats using the following CLI command. Now, we've documented this both outside IBM as well as inside IBM. The key thing is that we are disabling certain heartbeats so that we don't lose access. Now, we haven't actually pinned exactly which environments are more susceptible, so it's actually just a preventative best practices for you to do this. And that's why I actually did another slide just to make sure you actually can see some of the other ESX CLI tools to do this, because currently it hasn't been available inside the vCenter GUI. It's only ESX CLI. Now, compliments of Mr. Barry White out in New Zealand. By the way, they have great chocolate there. he has found on Virtualize and tested it a lot with some of his global customers. By all means, we need to turn down the VMware max IO size. So we talked about the max IOPS per path down to 1. Same thing here. I want you to turn so that the maximum IO in terms of the size goes down to 256. If it's anything higher, which is by the way the default, you'll actually spend a little bit more time on the array trying to process those block sizes. Of course, the array will take care of it. But if you actually turn VMware down to 256, the array will process even faster, and overall, you'll get a better performance metric out of all of it. If you don't believe me, take a look at the VMware documentation right there below. And by the way, this has been proven on other vendors as well. It's just we've tested it down to 256 for our arrays. Another part that we've tested for our arrays, compliments of Mr. Barry White, is Xcopy. Please adjust that to 4096. We've documented this inside VMware as well as on the IBM pages as well. And this is under the claim rules. Now, again, I'm going to bring this up. We have some gotchas that if you are in a mixed environment, it's very important that you double check those claim rules for our VAI as well as Xcopy and some of our other functions, because it's entirely possible that some of the other arrays have put in, shall we say, default claims, which will have detrimental performance on our arrays. So by all means, take a look at your claim rules in a mixed environment, especially as part of our gotchas and our performance tune-up. It'll only take you a few moments to double check to see what's going on. So, some last minute settings? Sure. Especially if you're going to do Windows guests and Windows guests using iSCSI versus Fiber Channel, I want you to consider having at least 60 seconds, and then some people, because of Windows being a little finicky, moving it up to 120. Now, another good point is that VMware doesn't like to have that many paths. Some people say, I want to do 8 paths. We don't want you to go past 8, and VMware will back us up on this one, especially when you have so many VMs going to a particular array. You might easily go past the maximum amount and hit a huge performance. So by all means, please start with 4 paths, not to exceed 8. And that's why we say 16 is supported, but we have our best practices here. Now, speaking of best practice, another thing, we can tweak a little bit more of how it automatically does its thresholds on its queues. And here's the formula as well as how to set it. By an easy stretch, you can just make sure it's 32. You don't have to accept the default. You don't have to let it guess. Please, as you can see, 32 for the queue full, and then the queue full threshold down to 8. I have this documented in the formula on the link down below. Again, back to iSCSI, I've got a great joke for you, and this is another person who, if you haven't met, if you haven't seen any of his work, he's on YouTube as well as everywhere else, AJ Casamento, Brocade Principal Research and Design Engineer. And it's a great joke, and let's talk about it now. If I tell you this joke about UDP, you might not get it. When I tell you the joke about TCP, you will get it eventually. And last but not least, if I tell you my Fiber Channel joke, you already got it 5 minutes ago and moved on. That's right. Take a look on the right side of the screen here. So whatever fabric you're using with VMware, just be aware of some of its known gotchas, and that there's going to be performance challenges if you're going to use Ethernet networks versus Fiber Channel. And by the way, I do a nice talk about futures, so you can actually see Fiber Channel is not dead and actually has some tremendous benefits. But yes, I'm a fan of solutions. So by all means, if you're going to use Ethernet because of its cost benefits, just be aware that you have some performance trade-offs, and there's a lot more best practices to make sure you don't run into any snags. And as you can see, there's 2 different links. We can go into more detail if you want. Feel free to give me a shout. And especially on iSCSI, this is where I thank Ty. He actually wrote up and did a deeper dive on MTU and port bindings, which is only for iSCSI. Now, if you insist on going against those best practices, even VMware will warn you about this. And why am I even spending time on this one? It's because we see this as PMRs and crit sits where customers in iSCSI or Ethernet environments, complain, hey, what's going wrong? This isn't working, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot more checklists and gotchas on iSCSI, and that's why I'm documenting them here so you can get ahead of this. Here's some of those links that we talked about, the red books for Virtualize and VMware, as well as you can actually take a look at some cool utilities on VMware. They have a hands-on lab in case you don't want to do anything in your production environment. And they also have a test drive as well as their own support matrix. Last but not least, we talked about some of these before, the queue depths, the round robin settings, the max block size. Last but not least, thanks for being a great IBM customer or business partner and for watching this. It means a great deal to me. Don't hesitate to reach out. And last but not least, please feel free to use my box link. You can take a look at my YouTube channel and do the session evaluation. Please let my manager and management know what you think of me, my presentation. And if nothing else, be one of the first 5 so I can give you a free prize. Right? AndrewJG at us.ibm.com. Thanks again. See you soon.